is firefighter Wes Paucus. I've been at the AFD for about 3 years now. We're currently stationed at 16s, and I've been here about 2 years. So let's get started. We're going to talk about fires in abandoned and vacant buildings. So first of all, why are we... Actually, we're going to talk about our objectives first. The objectives of this class are going to be to describe the evaluation process to identify potential hazards that vacant buildings pose to firefighters. We're going to describe the factors that should be included during our size-ups. We're going to describe the potential life safety hazards in those buildings during fires. We're going to describe methods to reduce the probabilities that vacant buildings and abandoned buildings will be occupied. And we're going to describe our firefighting operations in vacant and abandoned buildings. So first of all, why evaluate these buildings? Well, in a nutshell, fires in these buildings pose significantly increased risks to firefighters and civilians. This fire we had along I-35 back in May resulted in over 100 firefighters with asbestos exposure. There was a quote from the FTO review of this incident that says, "Obtaining knowledge of building contents and age of construction can help command and safety ensure that the incident action plan considers any exposure risks to firefighters on scene." So these fires happen and they're dangerous. What is the difference between vacant and abandoned buildings? Well, the primary difference when you're talking about these buildings is the owner availability. So whether or not you have an owner who is viable and available. Vacant buildings usually have an owner who is interested in the property, easily contacted, whereas with a abandoned property, there's usually an absentee landlord or someone that is not available, so it's considered abandoned. Unoccupied properties that are secure and well maintained do not pose the same level of threat to the public safety as properties that are unoccupied and open to unauthorized access. The magnitude of the problem, during 2011 to 2015, there was an estimated average of 3,310 firefighters per year that were injured during vacant building fires. 13% of firefighter injuries at structure fires occurred in or at vacant buildings. So there's a significant number of injuries happening at these fires, disproportionately, according to some data suggesting. Some older data suggests that firefighters are injured the most while operating at vacant or abandoned buildings. Do we have the right to enter? Do you have the authority to inspect a vacant property? The authority to inspect is typically outlined in codes and ordinances adopted by the jurisdiction, so it's up to the evaluator to be responsible to know those codes and regulations before they go inspect these places. All right, potential hazards and safety during the evaluation. Potential hazards of a vacant or abandoned structure include unstable structure. You might have also holes, trip hazards, standing water, vermin, so rats, cats, whatever. You might have hazardous materials on the property, unauthorized occupants, and also potential for criminal activity with people that are able to get inside. With evaluations of these buildings, you want to have teams of people, so 2 in, 2 out. You don't want people going in alone, and you want to wear the appropriate protective equipment. Also, if stability of the structure is ever an issue, don't go into the building. With our personal protective equipment, you want to wear things like hard hat, gloves, proper footwear, flashlight, radio. Make sure you're prepared to go in there. So why security is important in dealing with building security and marking when you're evaluating. The security of a building being evaluated is a key factor in the evaluation process. Buildings that are open to the elements that are exposed will degrade faster than buildings that are properly secured. And with 50% of vacant building fires were intentionally set compared to 10% of all structure fires. So vacant structures count for 30% of intentionally set structure fires. In unsecured vacant properties, 61% of the fires were intentional, whereas 35% of fires in secured properties were intentional. So with these vacant properties, you're having a lot more arson and people setting fires. So having the building secure can prevent a lot of these fires from happening because people will not be able to access. Methods to secure the properties. The way these properties should be secured depends on the location of the building, the condition of the building. So some houses in residential neighborhoods might just need to have the doors locked or the windows secured, whereas other buildings might require plywood, other boards and materials in order to secure those buildings. Marking vacant and abandoned properties. As far as marking these buildings, different jurisdictions may use different systems, so it's up to the evaluator to be aware of the methods that they need to use for that. Objectives while you're evaluating the building. Your objectives are to determine if the building is secure, identify hazards that require immediate and corrective action, evaluate the fire growth potential. So when you're talking about that, you want to understand the potential for exposure fires, the availability of fuel packages. You want to identify fire barriers that have been compromised, and identify the location types of hazardous materials that might increase the fire growth. You want to evaluate the potential for structural collapse and identify any conditions that will be hazardous to firefighters while they're fighting fires here. Property data. Owner information, who's responsible for the structure. It's good to know that and to be able to contact them. Is the building secure? Evaluating the security of the building determines if there are signs of recent entry. So with how many fires are set intentionally, you want to look for people that might have been there with trash, litter, furnishings in an empty building, evidence of cooking fires, anything that would show that people have been inside. Does the building have active utilities? The importance of collecting information regarding utilities is to determine if there's potential for ignition sources, things that could start these fires. Also just knowing where they are for first responders on scene so that they can go and control those utilities should be added to the pre-plan when you're evaluating these buildings. What was the original use of the building and has it been modified for other uses? So can the original use give clues as to what hazards might be present, such as holes in the ground, places where you could fall, hazardous materials, void spaces, or removed fire barriers or anything like that where it's been modified. As far as the building construction goes, the primary objective of the evaluator here is to document the observable building construction components. It's not supposed to be an engineering analysis of the building. We're just supposed to try and see what we can observe and assess that is visible with the building. So you want to look at the number of floors and basements. You want to look at the structural members. You're going to want to look at the truss constructions in both roofs and floors. Exposed structural materials. Are there any parts? Are they exposed as part of the construction or as a result of damage to the property? Construction of the exterior walls are metal tie rods with the stars. Have those been used? The number and size of openings in the exterior walls. Can this affect the timely discovery of fires? Is fire going to be visible? As well as ceilings, the hazard of different ceilings, configurations, and the impact on the fire development that the removal of the ceiling system could have. So are we going to spread the fire by opening up these ceilings? Evaluating the conditions of the structure. What's the condition of the interior walls? Breaches can allow fire to spread from compartment to compartment. What's the condition of the roof? A deteriorated roof can cause early collapse, which is obviously a bad thing for firefighting crews. So we should note whether or not the trusses in these buildings are wood or metal and how they might react under a fire. What's the overall condition of the structure? Are there any indicators of early collapse? Anything that might indicate that this building is going to fall down just due to gravity and based on degradation? Fire protection systems. Is there an operational fire alarm system? Many local ordinances require that these vacant structures continue to maintain their alarm systems, so sometimes they will be intact. You might have operational sprinkler or standpipe systems, so where those are installed, it should be determined whether or not those systems are intact. If the supply valves are closed, could it function by feeding the fire department connection? Where these systems are not available, or where they're broken, or have been degraded during the building evaluation, those connections should be marked as out of service and added to the pre-plan and evaluation. All right, so the fire potential in these buildings. Fuel packages. What's a fuel package? The term fuel package is used to describe fuel that is available from a spacer compartment. A fuel package is a discrete unit of fuel that will generate energy in the form of heat and light, as well as smoke and fire gases if it is ignited. The quantity and arrangement of the fuel packages plays a large role, so whether or not how much space you have between things, just the surface area of the fuel packages, like in this photo, the wood, what those materials are. It's common to find unusual fuel packages in vacant buildings. You might have dumping spots, you might have just things that the owner has left lying around. You might have large accumulations of debris, trash, furniture, or mattresses used by unauthorized occupants. Interior finishes also might play a role in fire growth. You might have finishes that have been covered up or concealed during modifications, and those things could also add to fire potential. Watch for exposed insulation and other materials such as plastics that might burn rapidly. So when we're looking at the configuration of the building, collecting information on the room size is important. This will play a role in whether or not, in just the magnitude of the fire as it spreads through the building. For example, large uncompartmented spaces that are part of the building design or the result of the removal of walls, floors, doors, and other structural components can allow fire from one side of the structure to spread easily to another side of the structure. Another important thing to consider is the interior configurations and how they will affect firefighters going through the building, so whether or not they can be lost, disoriented, and get confused in something like this, where they might find themselves in low visibility situations, and just being aware of that and being able to add that to your pre-plan and just know whether or not how dangerous it's going to be to send people inside. And then talking about potential for delay in fire department notification. Obviously time is a critical factor in the fire growth. We all know that fire doubles in size potentially every minute, and conditions that lead to delays in the discovery of these fires in vacant, abandoned buildings could be things like large buildings without windows or doors that fire comes out, whether or not it's located in an area where there are lots of people, or whether or not there's lots of other abandoned buildings around them. Buildings located in high crime areas, lack of functioning detection systems, so whether or not that's going to alarm and allow people to be notified. Security measures such as boarded up windows and fences. So all these things are going to add to possible delays in these fires, and they could be potentially growing to a large extent before we're even notified. Exposures. This part of the evaluation, when you're evaluating the vacant or abandoned structure, asks what else might burn if the building burns, and that's an obvious concern for us. And so it should be noted what things are exposures on either sides of the building, designated by the Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta. Should be noted how much distance is between those exposures and the risks that they pose, the separation distance. It's also important to know whether or not these exposures are occupied or vacant, so what kind of life safety issues that can pose. All right, hazards in the building. As far as the exterior and interior surveys go, the evaluator should identify these hazards, such as holes in the floors, missing stairs, and open shafts and pits. These conditions are really hazardous whenever anyone enters the building, but especially hazardous when firefighters are operating in low visibility situations. You might have potential for disorientation, and evaluating that interior layout, like we talked before, is important. Again, hazardous materials, you should expect to find hazardous materials in these buildings. These places are frequently used for dumping, or you might just have stuff piled randomly throughout the building. Again, fire development, the evaluation for fire development and early collapse that is acquired that should be placed into the pre-plan for the incident, and it should be something that command is aware of while they're operating at this fire. Should be right there in front of them as they are able to make the plan and respond to the incident, so knowing what kinds of things are happening. Impediments to firefighting operations. So things to expect as a potential obstacle to smooth operations are delay in alarm, lack of access, as well as water supply issues. So you might have lack of access, you might have gates locked, you might have fences in the way, you might have equipment piled all around the building, things like that that will get in the way of our apparatus. You should expect that. Also, so as far as poor water supply, the evaluation here should take into account the volume of water that's necessary for the expected fire potential with the fuel package that you can expect. It should also be the minimum for that should also take into account exposures, and the location of fire hydrants or other water sources should be indicated on the sketch of the building evaluation. Alright, so to conclude, we've covered that how vacant buildings and vacant and abandoned structures can pose increased risk to firefighters. We've identified just kind of some tools for evaluating those structures and what kind of things you should take note of. We've considered the use of building evaluation forms as one that has been handed out, and how you can go out and assess those structures in your own jurisdiction. With these tools, the fire department personnel can be armed with better pre-plans and knowledge, and just be able to reduce the likelihood of firefighter and civilian injury and death. And those things can also help just in general your operations in these buildings go more smoothly. Thank you very much.
Bravo, bravo.
That was boring. Did you hear record?